Well, hello there, woman beings. We are just popping in at the top of the episode, just briefly interrupting our regularly scheduled programming to just give you a heads up about some stuff.
Yes, this episode has some audio issues. I know it is the telltale podcast caveat that happens whenever podcasters have issues with their audio. We feel as though we have now been inaugurated into the world of podcastdom because we have now had audio difficulties. So we were trying some new things in this episode, along with our guest being anonymous, which means we had to manipulate their voice in order to keep their privacy and to protect them. And so that exacerbated some of the audio issues that we had because of the slightly different format that we used. All that to say, the audio is a bit, it's a lower standard than you guys are used to hearing from us. And so we wanted to give you a heads up on that.
Yeah, so we super apologize, but also we wanted to move forward with this episode because we feel like it was really important to share. And we actually are really grateful that this guest agreed to come on. So with that being said, though, in attempting to do our best, we are actually going to put captions on both the Spotify and YouTube version. So if you are having issues understanding what conversation is going on, head over to those two locations and you'll be able to follow along with the conversation.
Yeah. All that to say, we hope that you still enjoy the episode. Nonetheless, we hope that you still gain from everything that we say in this episode. It is definitely one that we were excited to record, and we're still excited to put it out and to share it with you guys because we think it's really valuable and an important story to tell. With all of that being said, I will go ahead and hand the mic over to Kelly, who introduces the episode right now.
Hi, woman beings. This episode is going to be heavy, and so I wanted to give a standard trigger warning for anyone listening. Our interview today will depict a first-hand account of sexual assault, bullying, and harassment. Please feel free to skip this episode and do whatever you need to take care of yourself. In September of 2020 in Cottonwood, California, allegations of hazing and sexual assault were reported within the West Valley High School varsity football team. The four plaintiffs, former players on the team, alleged that the varsity football team has a, quote, longstanding tradition of hazing, bullying, intimidation, harassment, and physical assault enacted on younger players by older players on the team. Allegations included the use of a PVC pipe for the purpose of jabbing into the younger player's rectal area. The PVC was confirmed as a tool to keep younger players in line. It was ritualistically passed down for many years and was prominently displayed in the boys' locker room. On November 18, 2020, the school district launched an independent investigation into the allegations. And 2 days later, the head coach of the team, Grendell, and the entire coaching staff resigned. By March of 2021, just 4 months later, the investigation into the allegations was determined inconclusive due to the lack of cooperation among students and staff. A civil suit was filed in May of 2021. As of today, the Shasta County District Attorney's Office has failed to file any charges. The suit claims a long-held history of systemic sexual harassment and bullying among coaches and players of the football team. Today, we are going to take the story back to 2003, when a young girl was harassed and assaulted by a football coach and teacher at West Valley High. This episode, you'll hear from Sondra, whose name and identity has been modified for her protection, and why she decided to come forward to share her story after hearing about the allegations of the four young football players at the same high school she attended 17 years before. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
Hello, woman beings, and welcome to the Woman Being podcast. I am joined today by the lovely Kellyanne and Emma.
Hello.
Happy to be here.
And I'm Kelly, and today we have a special guest joining us. Her name is Sondra. And she is a lifelong resident of Northern California, moved away for a little while, but she's been back here for the last 7 or so years. And she attended West Valley High from her freshman year to sophomore year. Sondra, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited that you're here. And excited in, a different way. But that's a weird way to say that. I'm so thankful that you're here. And I think we'll have you start by introducing us to Cottonwood, California, which is the location of West Valley High. Who are the people? What is the culture? And what is the role that high school football plays in the culture?
Cottonwood, it's a small little country town. It's one of those places where if you don't know everybody, you at least know their faces. And you're like, I've seen you in the grocery store a million times before. And so it's a very small, tight knit community. And everybody's kids have gone to school together. And so it's a really tight knit community. And I love growing up there. It was a beautiful community to grow up in. But West Valley and football was kind of the pride of that town, because it was such a small town. We didn't have a whole lot else going for us. We had one stoplight. So, having a championship football team that was known across the region was big deal, really big deal. And it was a huge point of pride to have your son play on the West Valley football team. And you wore that jersey, like it was like a medal. And, all the stores, local stores would just be plastered in West Valley Eagles football merchandise. You can buy it all over town. And it kind of felt like Texas in that way, which is the football team is the lifeblood of that town. And, Greg Grendell and that whole, the coaching staff, they coached those guys to championships year after year after year. So those guys were very well respected and, put up on these pedestals, like celebrity status, and very, very well respected. And, so I think that was, and I don't want to jump ahead, but I think that's why still this community is having such a hard time coming to grips with this, is they don't want to believe that person or those people that they held on a pedestal for so long could be capable of doing something like this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like their local hero, right? Mm-hmm. It's the person you never want to think would ever be involved with something so wrong, so bad. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened in your sophomore year at West Valley in 2003?
So first off, I think it's important to know where I came from. Mm-hmm. So I was not part of the rest of the elementary schools of Cottonwood. I went to a small charter school up in Redding. And so when I went to West Valley, I literally knew nobody. So I did not have any friends. I didn't have a social circle. Mm-hmm. So I was just kind of a loner, and I've always been a bit shy. So I had a hard time making friends. So I think that's part of why this happened was kind of an easy target, mm-hmm. So I was in this school, the biggest school I've ever been in. And my sophomore year, one of my teachers, I just started noticing early, I'm just as any woman knows, when somebody dude is giving you the weird eye, you're just I can't explain it. I just feel it. And when you look at me, it creeps me out. Yeah. And so I was getting that feeling a lot, and I was going home and telling my mom, just getting this creepy feeling from this teacher. And, she was like, do you want me to do something about it? And I was like, no, don't do that. It's going to make it worse. Cause I already didn't have any friends. So it's
don't rock the boat.
Please don't make this worse, And so we ended up going shopping and, okay, let's change, cover me up, and I think that's pretty, I think a lot of people understand that of it's how can I make myself smaller, less visible to try to make sure that, so it just kind of kept continuing where he started just making inappropriate comments, to me, about me, saying things in the classroom that are clearly sexual, and you should never be saying things like this in a classroom setting around children. And so I started, becoming just really uncomfortable being in his class. And so for a while, it was just that. It was just like, this dude's creepy. I don't feel safe here. I don't feel comfortable here. Mm-hmm. And then it started escalating, and to the point where one day he asked me to come to the front of the class and hand out papers. And as I turned around to hand them back, he grabbed me and kind of pulled me back. And it was one of those moments where you just kind of freeze, mm-hmm. you know. And I didn't really know what to do. I honestly, like, it's hard to even remember, like, what was I thinking at that point, because you're just such in, like, is this actually happening? Like, what do I do? Mm-hmm. Very aware that this is like a teacher, like, just like, so I just froze. And I remember looking out at one of my classmates and just locking eyes with him and, like, just thinking, like, is nobody going to do something? Mm-hmm. And just watching, like, a lot of people's eyes just go down. And then one thing that I didn't mention before is that, you know, he was a football coach, and the vast majority of that class was football players. Mm. So and I think that's why all that other conduct was happening. It really felt like going to class in a locker room. Mm. It was that vibe. Like, when they say, like, locker room talk, it was like, that's what going into that classroom was like. It was just like, if he didn't have his football players in there, I honestly don't think he would have done that. I think he felt safe and comfortable enough in that environment to do that. And so, like, as he was, like, holding me and just rubbing his hands kind of on my back and neck, some of the football players started, like, cheering. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really process it until much later, but it was funny to them. Like, it was treated like it was just a joke. And when I got back down, he let me go, and then I went and sat back down at my desk, and one of the other football players leaned over and said, like, you should hear what we say about you in the locker room. And at that point, I think I just blacked out for the rest of the day. Like, I don't even remember the rest of the day. And then it started to get out. I'm sure it started getting out through the football players. And pretty soon I was having notes stuffed into my locker calling me a whore and, like, asking me how big his dick was, and just being bullied on the bus and in the hallways. Just constant doubt. Like, I had girls who I thought had been my friend for, like, the last year and a half coming up and saying, like, oh, aren't you the one who filed the false report against that teacher? And so that day, I kind of skipped ahead to the bullying that started. But so that day I went home and was just sobbing, and my mom came in, and I finally I told her, and she was just obviously horrified. And she told me, she was like, okay, this is, like, you don't have a choice anymore. Like, your dad and I are stepping in at this point. And so they wrote a letter to the school. And the next day, my dad went in and hand delivered it to the principal and said, like, your teacher is assaulting my daughter, and this needs to be handled. And in the beginning, the school seemed to take it really seriously. And so I think that gave my parents a sense of hope that, you know, they were going to take care of this, and that they did have my best interest at heart and their best interest at heart, or, you know, the whole situation, that they really cared about it. But looking back, I think it was strange that they pushed pretty hard for us to not go outside of the school. Like, they were like, this will be internal. Like, we'll handle this. Don't seek counsel. Don't go outside. We will handle this. Looking back, I'm like, that was a red flag. And so then they kind of launched this investigation. The teacher was put on leave. And it just kind of started this process of just being poked and prodded. And at that point, you felt something shift where it's like, okay, I now feel like that initial support is now gone. And like you could feel this kind of other agenda slip in.
Yeah.
And, it's all the things that we hear all the time with women who face sexual assault. It was being asked, like, are you sure you didn't misinterpret? Do you know what he said? Like, is there any way you could have been blowing this out of proportion? Are you sure he said that? Are you sure he touched you like that? And so there was a lot of that kind of stuff happening. And that was really hard, especially since like I was 14 and being interviewed by what I remember pretty much all men, like administrators and people asking me these questions, and men asking me like, well, show me where he touched you. It's just like, oh God, this is awful. This is really like, and so like putting myself through that, all this, and while this is happening, like the bullying is ramping up. A rumor started going around that I had liked how he touched me and I'd gone to his house and had sex with him later. And so that started going around, and it was just brutal. And so finally they called my dad and said, like, so we completed our investigation and we corroborated significant amounts of what your daughter said, but, nothing to warrant him being fired. So we're reinstating him, but we're putting a letter in his account or in his file. And if you go read the article and you look at the things they were able to corroborate, he should have been fired. Like that was clearly a violation of sexual harassment policy, especially against minors. And so as far as I'm concerned, he really got just let off with a tiny little slap on the hand. Yeah, I think that was probably one of the hardest things to hear about that was, to see that basically nothing happened, and to be felt like what happened to me didn't even matter. Even though they had been able to corroborate like enough, it was still, and they told him in his letter that he's an incredible teacher and has given so much time, and he's such a compassionate and understanding teacher, and they love having him on staff. And it's just like, that just makes my stomach turn. So then after we found out that they basically weren't going to do anything, then they told me, because they hadn't been able to corroborate anything, that we were just going back to normal, and told me that I was going to be returned to his class. And I still remember like very clearly when I heard that, just like this shot of lightning just went through my body, and I was just like, are you freaking kidding me? And that day that I went to school, about to go into his class, I got called into the principal's office, and like, thank God another teacher who had seen me and obviously knew that I was not okay, stepped forward, and he had a TA period, that period, and plucked me out and said, she can come be in my TA. But that was like last minute. It was like an hour before class. And it was, so that was like a huge relief that that teacher stepped up and, pulled me out of that situation. But I left the school at the end of that year and then transferred to a different school. Because the bullying was just so bad. I was just, I just needed. And if that teacher was still going to be there.
Not interested. Yeah. What was the time frame from that initial assault to, well, not initial, but that breaking moment that your parents are like, we're stepping in, to when you were expected to return to his classroom?
It was a couple weeks.
Okay.
It happened kind of as we're coming into the end of fall. And I was, by like kind of the start of spring semester, I was told like, you're going to have to return. So the rest of my spring semester was all just getting through. Like my grades completely tanked.
Totally.
You know, and it's like, I'm just trying to just get through the day.
That's wild to me that it's just like a handful of weeks between this really horrible situation happening and then being like, all right, we're expecting you to move on basically and continue on with your class. I'm like, there was like essentially no time for you to like decompress, hopefully try and recuperate and the fact that there was no other option given to you other than this teacher who stepped in and was like, actually, she can come to my class. Like that whole thing is just pretty mind-boggling to me, and that I would expect it of, you know, a teenage girl.
Did you and your family ever consider going to the police and taking it outside of the school after sort of the school essentially did nothing?
Honestly, from that point to like the end, it's for me, it's kind of a blur. I think this was one of those cases where you really have to put a lot of the responsibility, I'm not going to say a lot, but all of the responsibility on the school. Because like my parents didn't know they had options. You know, it's the school's responsibility. That is what Title IX is. Is if something like this happens, there are certain protocols that have to be followed. And none of those were followed for me. I was not given protection from bullying. They were by law supposed to follow up with me and ask, like, are you getting any repercussions? Are you having any blowback? And I was supposed to be offered counseling and options to like, how can we make you feel safe? Like none of those conversations happened. And there's so many things that legally they were supposed to provide my parents in terms of the report, options, things that they can do if they wanted to pursue it outside of the investigation. They were supposed to have that conversation, and none of that happened. So unfortunately, my parents were in that situation where they honestly trusted the school, and they really thought that the district would care. And that if we reported it, that the district attorney would care. It's like and it's really heartbreaking when you realize they don't. Like and I know that's a bold statement to say, but it's really true. Like when you realize that honestly, like taking care of these things the way that they're supposed to be done is not top priority. And that's a really devastating realization to make, I think, as a parent and as a student. You know, that my safety wasn't your priority. Winning football games was.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of people in general aren't super educated on, like, you know, what steps to take if something like this happens. Especially, I feel like in 2003, you know, because I think the conversation around sexual assault has gotten a lot. There's been a lot more awareness around it over the years, but people don't think like, okay, like these are the steps I'll have to take if my child has a teacher touch them inappropriately. Like no parent wants to have to think about that, you know? And no like 15, 16-year-old is thinking about those steps either. That's not something that a teenager should have to worry about.
And that was part of what was so damaging, was I felt like I did everything that you're supposed to do. You know, like I felt during it, I felt like I was doing the right thing. I'm like, oh man, he's like, they're going to take care of this, you know? And it was really mentally damaging to feel like I spoke up. I told the adults. And nobody did anything. And there were so many adults that could have, should have. Like it wasn't just like one or two people knew. It's like whole administrations knew, whole districts knew, child protective services officers knew, the sheriff knew, the entire staff of the school knew, like who are all under obligation to report. And no one did shit. And so this was a massive failing of the adults who were in charge of keeping me safe. And so that was really damaging. And one of the things that I really had to work on in the years after to repair was the belief that me saying anything made any kind of difference. That was really damaged of like, why should I say anything? You know, because it was really, what happened after was more traumatizing than the actual event.
Yeah.
And it was like, I kind of wish I didn't say anything. There's a little part of me that's like, if I would have just gone home and just let that sweep under the rug, at least it probably would have just been that isolated incident.
Mm.
Like, it was the bullying that happened afterwards and the being dragged through and told I'm a liar and called a whore. Like, that was the traumatizing part. So you can start seeing why women don't want to come forward. Because like, at least that one event, I can work on that and I can move past that. But the being smeared and ripped apart and poked and prodded, like, that's a whole nother layer of trauma.
Yeah.
That you can totally understand why people don't want to put themselves through that.
You were the innocent person in this scenario, you know, like, and you're the one who gets bullied after that.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
add up logically. Like, why would you be the one who's getting repercussions? And
Oh, I can totally answer that question because it's a good boys club.
Yeah.
It's the good old boys club. It's like they protect their own.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And now that we know, and more stories are coming forward, like the boys, and since I came forward, and there's been messages getting sent to the reporter about other people coming forward and saying some things, and so it's clear. And I knew this because I was like, okay, if this happened to me back in 2003, and then what happened in 2020, like, I don't believe for a minute that this happened back then, this time, and nothing happened in between. There's something like this doesn't just go dormant for 17 years and then pop up again. It's like, and it escalated.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the fact that it got to the point that it did, where there's a stick and we're actually physically penetrating people. It's like, okay, that's gone to a whole new level.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thing you don't just get there overnight.
There's a lot of steps in between.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have to look the other way.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who have to encourage it or give it pass.
Right.
A lot of people who have to be indoctrinated into that culture in order to not report, to participate. So it's like, and that seems to be the school and district's way of handling this. Is it's like, if we victim blame, we'll just drive them out of school and then they're quiet.
Right.
And then we just don't even have to, we'll just make them go away. And that seems to be their standard operating procedures. Like, we'll just remove the whistleblower and then just go back to standard operations.
Right.
And I really, really hope that this starts changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it was probably difficult for you, maybe not necessarily shocking, but when these allegations came out about the boys who were sexually assaulted at the same school. And so, like, how have you been coping with that and the connection to your story?
Speaking up. Like, that's how I would cope. Like, as soon as I read the story, and it was one line in particular. It was the line when they said that the administration, that they were shocked that this happened. And Grendell was saying that he had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read that, just the first thing that went through my mind was bullshit. And it was just like, oh my God, you guys are still, like, this is still happening.
Yeah.
And that was like, this rage went through me, you know, and it just shifted a lot for me. It put me into it gave me kind of almost like a weird purpose when I read that, and I realized that I had information that could blow a hole in that story and could corroborate a lot of what the boys were experiencing, and that I could go stand with them and say, like, you're not standing alone.
Mm-hmm.
That became like how I coped, because it's like, I can't just know this and not say it and watch these boys go through the same system I went through and get it even worse. Like, what they endured is way worse than what I ever did. And so there's kind of this, if they can take that, I can do this. And if there's anything that I can do to help them or stand up for them, with them, and help to just add my voice to holding these people accountable, that became like, that is how I'm going to cope.
Yeah.
You know, I can't stay silent. And, you know, especially since like some of those stories that have come out of people, you know, commenting on the story and sharing their experiences at West Valley, you really realize, like, I wish I could say on here, like, some of the things that the stories that come in. I mean, it's horrifying, and it makes you realize, like, how, like, really honestly, so everybody knew.
Mm.
And what's really awful is the stories coming in of the students saying, like, I literally felt like I had nowhere to go to say. And like that's horrifying to me, that so many people are witnessing this, that are being exposed to this kind of behavior, you know, from people who are supposed to be role models, and girls getting exposed to this and young boys getting encouraged to behave like this. And then to hear stories saying, like, and I felt like I had no one to go to. I felt like everyone was in on it. And like, that's an incredibly isolating feeling. You know, and especially because of that small town feeling we were talking about, of it's like, you know, like, that if you step forward, you say anything, it's not just going to be the district coming after you, the school. It's like the whole town's going to turn on you.
Right.
Because they're so loyal to that idea, you know, of the West Valley champions. And
Right.
if you threaten that, it's like you're threatening a big part of their belief system. And it just gets vicious. You know, so that's another part of like coping, is coming forward. And it's been so rewarding to see those stories of people saying, like, wow, I had no idea that someone had come forward about this before. Like, this was happening to me and I felt alone. I had no idea that they knew for so many years. And so that pisses me off too. It's just like, this, all of it, so much of this could have been prevented.
Yeah.
It's like, if you guys, and there's probably people even before me, you know, like, I don't think I was the first one. So there's just like, so when I read them, the district and the school say these statements of like, we care about the safety of our students, and this is our, you know, our main thing, I just want to scream. Because I'm like, then why didn't you do something?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and you had the power to change this, and you could have put the safety of your students above championships, but championships got you money and funding. So you prioritized money and power over children being sexually assaulted under your watch, and you need to own that.
And meanwhile, they're praising this person that is doing the assaulting. They're like, he's a great teacher. We've worked with him for so many years, and then they're shaming those that he has assaulted. It's like, how do you like get there? Like, my brain is trying to comprehend how an entire like school basically gets to that point.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible healing journey. I think this is a huge testament to the inner work that you've done, in that you essentially went from feeling like, what's the point in even saying anything ever? Like, why does what I have to say even matter at all? And now, 17 years later, you're coming out and you're saying, no, I'm going to speak up against this. And I think that's incredibly brave, to have been through what you have been through, and then to say, no, I'm going to fight this battle again. So, I mean, I am in awe of your bravery and courage in that. Because that's a full circle experience. And sadly, that what we see with so many cases of sexual assault and victims coming forward, it doesn't even sometimes matter how many of them come forward. We still see perpetrators being excused for their behavior, for victims not being believed. And it's thankfully, to the Me Too movement and other sort of uprisings in this topic, it's becoming more and more okay to talk about it and to say, no, this is not okay anymore. We've been allowing this to happen behind closed doors for way too long. And so I see our culture shifting in that way, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the town of Cottonwood and whether or not this administration can stomach its past.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, we see like patterns across all sorts of, industries of sexual abuse or of people who are in positions of power, utilizing that power on people that they have, some sort of authority over, that they have some sort of way of being able to dominate over. And I mean, we touched on this a little bit already. Like you mentioned, like the good old boys club that's present within that school, and like about this priority of like the football players over the well-being of students. And I think that we see that a lot in schools all over the country. And it sounds to me like this is something that's pretty deeply rooted. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, that was something that I've had to be thinking about a lot lately. This was obviously like, for him to have felt comfortable doing that in a classroom in front of other students, he had to either be completely stupid or he had to know that he would be protected, that there wouldn't be consequences. Like, you don't just show up at a school and like the next day you're doing that. Like that you have to know the school is going to back you. You have to know that there's very little possibility for consequence.
Right.
So it's like that culture and that understanding must have already been established by the time I even came through, or else I have a really hard time understanding how someone would be so brazen to do that without second thought and then laugh it off and think it was a joke. Like that is like, okay, this has to have been around for a long time, and that for the football players to even participate in it at that moment. And when the teacher was, confronted and talked to, he was very much like, I didn't do anything, like nothing happened. And, I never did anything. And I know this might sound strange, but there's a part of me that's like, I believe that that's what you believe. I really do. Like, I think that culture was so, that behavior was normalized. And it didn't feel like something that he had planned out or thought about. It really felt like he saw an opportunity in the moment and he took it. That it was just like an opportunistic thing, that it was funny, it was a joke, it didn't mean anything, like it was just a ha-ha thing, and that the football players in the room seemed to take it that way too, and have no concept of what impact that in your mind as a joke is going to have on that person.
Right.
And so the disconnect of that, and I think that's the culture that you're talking about. It's so deeply rooted that someone would even be able to behave like that and think it was a joke. Like an adult against a 14-year-old, and you still somehow think that's
right. You're not seeing the power dynamics here.
Right. It's just like you're missing so much. Yeah. So again, you're either stupid or you've been taught in this culture that that's okay and you can get away with it and no one's going to do anything.
Yeah.
And so then it breeds.
Yeah.
And it's festering.
That makes me think as well of the recent case with Governor Cuomo in New York, former Governor Cuomo, in his, as like sexual assault allegations came up about him, his excuse was, well, I'm of a different time. And he, in his like non-apology that he did, he essentially said, well, sorry, I didn't really know because I'm of another generation. And it's like, that doesn't ever make it okay. Like it sure, maybe you have grown up in a culture that affirms this, but like take the moment to learn and listen to what other people are saying. When other people are saying that this has hurt them, take that into consideration instead of trying to just match that up with this like this culture that's essentially affirmed you for so long and affirmed your abuse of power for so long.
Yeah. So I want to take you back a little bit to something you had sort of hinted towards before, but essentially, and through the investigations of Shasta Scout, which is a local news organization, we have uncovered the letter that the school wrote and that your parents wrote to the school, and all of those documents have been filed, which is honestly, to me, kind of surprising that we even, if we didn't do anything about the sexual assault in the first place, we did take care to document it. But these documentations essentially prove that the school was in violation of Title IX. Yes. And for anyone who doesn't know exactly what Title IX is, it is a very long, complex, like, set of, laws and regulations. But it was essentially created to prevent sex-based discrimination under any sort of school or education program or entity funded by the government. And so it seems like we sort of have proof that, hey, you were in violation all these years ago. It seems very obvious that up until now, there's probably been countless violations that have preceded the recent allegations of the boys on the football team. And so I guess my question is, like, what do you think West Valley High and the Anderson School District need to do to take proper steps in order to make sure that Title IX is being honored? Is there a way to turn this around? And if that is possible, what steps would need to be taken for them to properly begin creating a safe environment for all sexes within the school district?
I think in my mind, there's like 4 things. The first one is they need to listen, because it's your students are continually telling you this is a problem. You know, this has been coming up for a while. So that whole protecting, trying to save face, like, that has to stop. You just have to listen, be like, okay, we obviously really dropped the ball here, and we've had a massive blind spot, and we're now going to listen to these kids and their stories, and we're going to, like, sit here, as uncomfortable as it is, and face our massive failure as an administration. Like, you have to look at it. You can't fix it until you look at it. You know, it's like first step of fixing a problem is admitting you have a problem. Like, that has to be where it has to start. I think that's the first thing that has to happen, and that's why right now I think that's where we're deadlocked. Is they're still not willing to listen, and the school is still touting themselves as this incredible school where they put the safety of their students first, and, you know, talking about their graduation rates and all this. And it's like, I don't care. Yeah. Like, I don't care. I don't care how many scholarships you have. If there's this underground, this dark belly of your school where students are being assaulted, you can't call yourself a safe and successful school. You just can't. So until you can own that and start prioritizing the safety of all your students, not just your football players, until that can happen, I don't really see any way forward. That's the first step. After that, I'd say education. Like, I've wondered of, like, with their understanding of Title IX, is it that they didn't follow it because they didn't care and they were trying to cover, or they honestly didn't know the law? And either one is horrifying. But it's, if you honestly didn't know, you need to learn.
It's a responsibility.
Yeah, because that was one of the things that really upset me, was when I heard that the reporter I was working with, when she interviewed the superintendent, that he told her, he's like, well, Title IX is only for sports. And so again, it's like, okay, well, there you go again with like prioritizing your athletes. You think this protection only happens for your football players? So again, that like shows where their priorities are. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not an athlete, who cares? Really, it's like it's kind of the attitude they have. It's like we're going to tout and put our athletics up on a pedestal, but if you're not in that club, we're not going to really go to bat for you.
Well, that's scary too, that the superintendent of a school thinks that Title IX is only for sports.
Right.
That's kind of a scary thought because they're essentially like leading the ship, right?
It is horrifying. Yeah. You're just like, oh my God, are they asleep at the wheel?
Yeah.
Like, and so it makes you wonder like how much of this was malicious, that they were intentionally covering things up, and how much was just incompetence.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably a mix of both. Like, I think there does have to be a mix of it's like looking the other way, like knowing something's gross and stinky and just be like, I'm going to choose to not look at that. It's like, okay, you're going to have to own that too. But I think there's probably a healthy dose of they just didn't know either, which like, okay, you're going to need to educate yourself. Like if you really care, like walk the talk, like sign all your admin people up for Title IX training, sexual harassment training. Like there should be massive district wide education of like, okay, all our people need to be in the know. Our teachers need to be reminded you are mandatory reporters.
Yes.
If you see something, you are under law, have to report it. Like all the teachers who saw something and didn't say anything. And, you know, there have been some teachers that have been talked to that had said, like, I'd heard rumors, I'd seen little things, but I didn't want to believe it was to the extent that I was hearing. And it's like, it's that kind of like, you know, they say like ignorance is bliss, but it's like that kind of like willing ignorance that allows this to happen. Like it's allowing more kids to be abused, the adults just not wanting to look because it's uncomfortable.
I think that people like for things to stay in the normal, you know, they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to have to face the reality that something could be wrong, but that's not going to make things go away. That's not going to ever solve a problem. In fact, it's probably going to allow it to fester. And then they're going to be confronted with something even bigger and even more uncomfortable later on, you know, because they've allowed with willful ignorance for things to persist.
And so I think step 3 would be like a massive rearranging of your priorities. That safety of your students in general, like has to always come before athletics and money and grants and awards. Like, you know, and I think along the line, they probably lost themselves in like the money and the accolades, and it just became easier to it's more comfortable in the limelight, you know, when everyone's singing your praises. So I think that's another thing they're going to have to face of, you know, we're going to have to take steps that are going to be incredibly uncomfortable for us. We're going to have to admit and own some things, but we're going to do it because we have to make sure our students are safe and that this doesn't happen. And we have to maybe hire more people or do training and have our students understand if something is happening to you, here are your options. Here's who you come talk to, and make sure that every student knows that they have somewhere safe to go and someone to talk to who's going to take them seriously. You know, that's huge. You know, you can't have kids going to a place where they feel unsafe and have no one to tell about it. Like that's awful. And, you know, so, and if you haven't been out to West Valley, like it's literally out in the middle of the cow field. It's isolated from everything. So it's like when you're on that campus, it's like you're isolated. Like you're there. Like you can't go off campus for lunch. Like you're there and you're on the bus. And it's like until your parents pick you up, like you are in West Valley land and you can't get out. You know, so it's while you're there, it's really important to feel safe.
Absolutely.
You know, that's really, really important. And then I think the last bit, which is probably going to be the hardest, is taking accountability. And you know, everybody from the administrators to the coaches to the community, because the community is going to have a reckoning too of the adults who attacked and smeared the kids who came forward, the community who supported and defended this and actually attacked young kids who had just been brutally assaulted. Like, you're going to have to own that.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to take a real harsh look at yourself of like why you felt okay doing that.
Yeah.
And like, why was that reality so hard for you to see and accept that lashing out at children felt like the right thing to do? Like, why did that trigger you so bad? Did maybe your kid play for Greg and now you're thinking like, oh my God, what happened to my kid? You're going to need to sit with yourself and ask that question, but you can't go attacking other people just because you're triggered.
Yeah.
So the community is going to have to take their blinders off and be willing to take Grendell off that pedestal.
Totally.
And it's like, I know that's going to be a hard thing to do. That's the end of an era, you know, and that's, you know, that's like you said, it's an icon. You know, he's like the celebrity status, and it's never easy to confront that your heroes, your idols, did things like this, you know. But I think that's what we're seeing so much in like politics and the Me Too movement. It's like all these people that we put in positions of power and looked up to. It's like there's abuse of power that comes with that so often, and so I think that the community really has to reckon with that, you know, that like what you were saying of like, it can't be him. It's like, yes, it can. That it's your neighbor, it's your family friend, it's your family member, it's your football coach, you know. And so I know that's uncomfortable to sit with, but damn, you're gonna have to see it at some point and hold those people accountable. And I think the coaches, anybody who was involved, who knew, should be fired, should lose their teaching credential. And I think it really needs to come down to that of like, you're done. You lost your privilege. Like, if you stood by and saw this and knew what was going on and you did nothing, you no longer get to be around children. You're done. So I think accountability like that needs to happen, which is why it's so frustrating to me that charges still haven't been filed. But it's like, you know, with any kind of parenting, it's like what you allow persists. And so to just watch them get away with it again, when it's like, when I read those, what happened to the boys, like I thought for sure this is going to be it. Like, there's no way that this isn't the thing that, you know, really brings this down. Because it's like, we're talking rape with minors now. Like, this is serious. This isn't just, oh, he grabbed me or said something that made me uncomfortable. This is like, okay, we're talking felonies now. And that they're still sweeping it under the rug. No charges have been filed. Like, my mind is blowing, but it's just like, you're still not going to take this seriously. Like, what is it going to take? Like, and that's horrifying to me. Like, that's like, what's the next story that's going to come out?
And unfortunately, I mean, you talk about the schools needing to shift their priorities. And the thing is like this prioritization of sports, or even at times of like just academic achievement and things like that, that's what funds a lot of schools and allows schools to do better as an education resource, right? Like, it allows schools to have more programs, to have more resources. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, I think that I can imagine that it's difficult to make that compromise at times, where it's like, I can see that school administrators may want to still hold on to this like championship football team because that gives them so much as a school, and in some ways probably does good for the school. But do they, at the end of the day, do you value that over, you know, actual safety for students? And some of that could come down also to just like rethinking for like public schools, like how they get funding at all, you know, like it goes like all the way back to that kind of thing, because there's even also like, there's a lot of shortage of teachers right now. There's a lot of teachers that aren't, that have left the education world in the midst of the pandemic. There's teachers that have left because of fear of working within the schools. There's teachers that have left because they don't want to, you know, cooperate with vaccine mandates within schools. Like, there's like a wide range, and also just teachers that have like retired, and there's less people that want to become teachers. And so I think that in some ways there's probably a scarcity mindset of like, well, we can't get rid of this teacher who's done these bad things because we might not get another, or it'll be difficult to find another. And it's frustrating, because there are a lot of factors. And part of me is like, well, I just wish that these things just didn't happen. And then you wouldn't have to deal with that, you wouldn't have to, grapple with really hard decisions. But it does, I think a lot of it does come down to priorities.
Well, you make a really good point too, of that, all of this trickles down. And it, if we're going to look at the systemic issue, and you're exactly right. It goes up to funding. So it does trickle into politics on a state level, on a district level, on a national level. That's
Sure.
when they're talking about cutting funding in schools, we're not just talking arts programs here. And so I think that's something that people don't always necessarily think of, that when a school is well funded, they can better address things like this. That, it's if your funding isn't being held hostage by this, and you're like, shit, if we hold this dude accountable, we're not going to have any funds. Our boosters that we do, the West Valley football team athletic boosters, that brought in so much money to the school because everybody showed up. And it was this big thing. It was like a freaking state fair, in Cottonwood. And so that was that pretty much funded the athletics department. So if you take this person out, it's if that goes away, that's a big hit. So I think you bring up a really good point of you can't look at this and not look at the money, and see how this is a big factor in it. And I don't envy the administrators of having to balance these things and have to think about this. But I think that's when people are thinking about, cutting funds for schools and who they're voting in, I don't think they think about this granular of the impact of what a well-funded school is. They have the power to be able to protect their kids. They have the power and the ability to fire teachers and hire another one and be like, we'll be fine. You got to go. But when there is that power structure, that power dynamic, I think it does make it hard. So it's never just with the teachers or just with the school or just with the district. It keeps going up. This is
so many factors.
Yeah. So it's a messy thing to unravel. It's this isn't a simple fix.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty big collective fuck up. It's not only were the students and the teachers and the parents in on it, but also it just kind of keeps growing and expanding. And it's how do we all help contribute to fix things like this? Anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, something like this, I think, happens on a gradual way where, one thing is permitted and then another thing is permitted. And then it eventually gets to the point of the story we're seeing with the young boys who were raped. And it, in the same way, to reverse it will probably have to be gradual. It's going to have to be steps that are taken. And that is something that myself, as someone who really wants change to happen quickly, and wants to see things reformed and put right quickly. That's frustrating. But also, especially in something like a school administration or in a government or in a movie industry or whatever it is that you're talking about, it is hard. Those things move slow because they're big. There's so many people that you're factoring in. There's so many roles that have to shift and change, and the way that you do things that have been so ingrained. And so it's definitely frustrating to think about the slowness of it and the fact that it will take time for people to move in a more, constructive direction.
Right. Which doesn't excuse the wrong that's been done at all. Yeah. I think there are people who deserve to be fired in this situation, and there are people who need to be removed from influence over minors. There are people who need to have serious, criminal charges probably held against them. And so I think that's sort of holding that intention is that there are some things that ought to happen right now.
Yeah.
And then there are some of the bigger systemic, growth that can happen over time.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that it takes time doesn't excuse the fact that it happened.
No, and I agree with you. Like the big systemic changes, like within the school and the district, that's going to take time. But I completely agree with you of that criminal charges can be and should be filed against multiple people. Like, so the fact that it's hung up in the DA is like, that's not cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is not okay. And especially since like when I got my hands on my report and like I saw my my sheriff's file on my case, I was just shocked when I saw that it was still open. Like my case was still open 17 years later, and there was like talking in my case talking about like CPS had been alerted and nobody followed up, and that the sheriff knew and nobody followed up. Like I was just like, oh my, there's a case here of like child of like sexual abuse by a teacher, and it's still open. Like no one followed up on this. So there is some responsibility with like law enforcement and the legal system here in this town. And so I think that's the place where like the swiftest shifts can come is it's like file the charges. Yep. Like you could do that tomorrow. You could do that next week. And like there's no excuse.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We need executive action right now.
Yeah.
Systemically, we could build something over time. But
Yeah, it's rather shocking to me. Like, not rather shocking, like absolutely shocking that these steps haven't been put into place already, but then that, teachers don't have Title IX training on a yearly basis or sexual harassment training on a yearly basis. Or maybe that's required, I don't know. But it's not implemented.
Even if it is happening, like, is it being taken seriously?
Right. Totally. So sexual harassment training across the board is sometimes just not taken seriously. But like when we're talking about like the care of minors and the responsibility exponentially like quadruples, that you have to take it so seriously. And I mean, I remember my first job ever was working for an after school program as like a 15-year-old. And I was like terrified at all times that something might happen to this 8-year-old that I, for some reason, am in charge of. And like, I didn't have enough training for that. So like how much more so the school system? I don't know. But speaking of small and large steps, how's your mental health journey in all this? Because you've been through a lot. It's a lot of trauma. And how have you been able to recover? And like, what are the things that have helped be most beneficial to you? Because this is a lot, right? We're talking about a lot.
Well, first, before I even get into the recovery, I think a lot of times people don't think about the fallout. And it's, it's been almost a little over a year since those boys came forward. And unfortunately, like the newsreel has kind of fallen off about it. Like the community has kind of, it's still relevant, but it's not as top of mind. And for me, it's like, what happened with those boys? Like they're just starting. Like this is nowhere near over for them. Like they're just getting started on their journey. This isn't something that just goes away quickly. So I think that's something that if people who haven't had experience with sexual assault sometimes forget that this is not something that you heal from quickly, and it takes a lot of time, and it comes in waves. Like it's cyclical. It's definitely not a linear healing. Like it takes a lot of different paths. And for me, one of the biggest immediate impacts that it had, that I can even say now, like I didn't even realize that that what happened to me was why this happened. Like, and that's one thing that I'll say about my mental health journey is like, there was so much fallout from that I couldn't even conceptualize until about 6 to 8 years later. So when you're talking about like mental health healing, it's like, for me, I can only speak for myself. If there was multiple years where like I almost couldn't even deal with it because I hadn't got enough perspective, and I couldn't really see really what the damage was. And so like almost immediately after this happened, I started having an eating disorder. And I started, binge eating and just developed this really, really bad food addiction, which later became, anorexia. And so it was something like an eating disorder and body shame that I dealt with, for about 9 years after this. Yeah. And it wasn't until I started unpacking that that I realized, oh, this was the root of that. I hadn't even made that connection. So that took almost a decade to be like, oh my God. Like, 'cause when I finally started like, okay, I need to heal my relationship with food, my body, like absolutely, like my self-worth is in the trash can. Like I need to fix this. 'Cause it was really like self-abuse with food. I was very aware that this is like, I'm hating myself and I'm doing it with, like, I was very conscious. Like I was aware of that, but I didn't know why I hated myself so much. I didn't know why. And until I started unpacking it and was like, well, when did it start? And it was like literally right after this. And that was kind of my way of coping with being at school, that I would hide in the bathrooms and just eat by myself to stay out of the halls and give myself something to do while sitting in the bathroom by myself. Might as well eat some pizza while you're in there. So it started out of a coping mechanism and out of a defense mechanism. And that program just never really stopped until almost 10 years later. I was like, okay, I got to stop this. And then realized like, holy shit, I didn't even realize those two were connected. So there could be fallout things that you're not even ready to see or address until 10 years. And it's such a slow process, because like I said, you don't understand the full impact. Like I didn't understand how deeply that damaged my trust of adults, and especially adult men, until years later. I didn't realize how much that had damaged my belief that I had a right to speak up and say what was okay for my body and what was not. Didn't even realize like that there was years where I was getting myself into just bad situations with men, had no self-worth, was letting myself be taken advantage of, because I literally had my self-worth just like stripped from me and been told that like your body has no value. We don't care what happened to you. We won't defend you. And so that really reverberates through you in a way that you can't even, when you're a child, you can't put words to that. You can't understand the damage that's done when the adults shame you in that way, that's deep. And how deeply that instilled that like your body has no value, your boundaries don't mean shit. And I carried that for a long time, and that was showing up in relationships, and had more sexual assault down the line because of my lack of feeling like, I'm like, I just stood up once, why would I say no again? Like, I know how that goes. I'm definitely not putting myself through that shit again, so it like kept happening. Like there was more things that kept happening out of this. And I was in therapy like almost immediately after this. My parents put me in therapy, like thank goodness. But like I was saying, at that time, all I could do was talk about the details. I had no concept of the impact of how like my soul had been altered and my mind had been altered. Like that didn't manifest until years later. So I had thought I'd made peace with it because I'd talked about it so much, and I could tell you, I know it's not my fault. I could tell you all the words. Like I had therapied and done it all, but I hadn't dealt with the emotional, spiritual impact of it. And I didn't deal with that until much, much, much later. So it's a mix of like, give yourself a lot of time. And I think and I hate saying that because it's so shitty. To say like, you're not going to know how much this affected you for probably another 5 to 10 years. And that's awful to say, that you're going to have to revisit this further down the line. This doesn't just go away in a year or two of therapy, that this is going to be coming back a lot. And as you dig into things in yourself, like so many things within your own mindset are going to be linked back to that. Like, when did that belief start? Boom. You know, so they're going to, these boys are going to be unpacking this for a really long time. And so I think anyone around them, their families, the community needs to have just so much compassion and support for that. This is going to be a long journey. And you have to completely piece together back your sense of self-worth, your belief of your own body autonomy. You know, that's a whole, so that I have the right to say, no, that's not okay with me, that I should have been listened to, and that it was the adults who let me down, not that I was so unworthy of being defended that it just didn't matter. Like, there's so much restructuring of the narrative that you have to do to place the true blame at the feet of those who are truly responsible. Because I think that's one of the messed up things that happens with especially child abuse and child sexual assault is, like, you don't know what's supposed to happen yet. And so how it was handled for a long time, for years, I was struggling with, like, maybe I did blow it out of proportion. Like, because if it was as bad as I remember, I feel like somebody would have done something. Like, and so there was a lot of self-doubt for a long time, and that hindered my ability to truly heal from it for a long time, because there was still, like, blaming myself for part of it, carrying some of the guilt of, like, maybe it was just a joke. Maybe I was just so sheltered that I didn't understand, and I did blow something out of proportion. Maybe I did smear a good teacher's name. Shit, maybe I shouldn't have. Like, it's like you're carrying that, because when the adults around you who you think, when they're not reacting, you're kind of like, okay, maybe it's me. like I'm the kid here. Maybe they know something I don't. And I think that's part of the damage of when adults don't act. It's like, you have to show that child this is not okay. Like, you have to set that example. And when you don't, you're allowing them to believe that weight is on them. Right. And like, you have to, or at least you don't have to, because we don't, but I think that's why it's so important for adults to step up and make it very clear that this is not okay. You should never be touched like this. You have the right to say no. And that has to be understood, because it's incredibly damaging, you know, to not have that, you know, and to feel like you're the kid speaking out. You're like, no one else is, no, like, why am I the only one talking? And that just really fucks with your head.
Yeah, totally. Because you look around and you see the other kids and they're fine, and this didn't happen to them. So if there's not a clear, no, that was wrong, someone wronged you, it's very natural to assume, okay, well, what did I do? Right. Like, this doesn't happen to all the kids, then why did it happen to me? And what's wrong with me that would make someone treat me that way?
Right. And then it felt like kind of the whole school was in on it. Yeah. It again made you feel like, okay, maybe I'm the wrong one. Like, because this really feels like this isn't just me versus a teacher. This is me versus, like,
the community,
a whole bunch of people. It's like, and a community that I didn't really come from. Like, I was like, I don't know these people. I didn't go to school with these kids. So it was a really isolating feeling. So yeah, I think, you know, the mental health is like, it takes time, but I think it really, really comes down to, like, never giving up. That, like, never allow yourself to get to a point where you're defending what happened to you and saying, like, I'm just gonna be okay with it. It's like, no, what happened to you is not okay. And you have every right and almost responsibility for your own happiness, for your own peace, for your own recovery, to work on continually getting back your self-worth after that. Like, it is worth the pursuit. And so hopefully they have anyone who's going through something like this has family and people around them who understand that and can support them.
So then in that same vein, if you could speak to those boys from West Valley, or really to anyone who has gone through sexual assault, what would you say to them?
Well, especially to the situation with West Valley, the first people that I actually want to acknowledge is their parents. That I am so grateful for how hard my parents fought for me. And the fact that we were able to corroborate so much of this because my mom just wouldn't let it go. And we have so much documentation because of that, that there's a letter, there's police reports, and that was all her.
Yeah.
And so to see like how hard these parents fought for their boys too, and like how much like the dads put on the line and how hard the moms fought. And I know from talking to my own parents, like, you know, the guilt and the shame that they carry from trusting the school, from feeling like, why did I trust you? I should have done something different. Like I should have gone to further lengths. I should have. And so my first message would be to them and just say thank you. You know, like, that it's not their fault that the system is broken and that the justice isn't happening that should. Like that's not something they should carry. Like they did absolutely everything they possibly could, and like that's what counts. And I can just tell them, like, I know you're not getting the justice you want, but how hard you fought for your kids, like they're gonna remember that.
Yeah.
And because I remember that, like even though justice didn't really happen for me, like seeing my mom and dad go to bat for me like that was really, really powerful. So I just want to tell them thank you for not letting it go, and for standing with their kids through this horrific thing. Like, you know, it's not easy. Like this thing happens to the whole family. It's not just this one kid. It's hard for everybody to watch someone you love go through that. So I just want to give a major shout out to them and for just being fucking warriors for their kids. Like, just thank you. And to the boys and anybody who is going through this, you know, there's nothing you can really say to like in the moment, because it's just like, look, this is shitty and it's going to be shitty for a long time. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that or tell you it's going to be okay, you know, because it's like, it's not okay. And it's not going to be okay for a while. So it's okay that you're not okay. But the bigger thing, you know, now that I've gotten so much time and perspective on it, the biggest piece of advice I could give them is, as you look forward, as you go forward, like try to look for ways to make this mean something. That just allowing yourself to fall into this, like don't allow yourself to become a, you know, victim that this happened to you and it destroyed your self-worth, and like that's the story of this. Like that's continuing to let them break you. And that's so important, like to not give them that. That this can be a horrible thing that happened to you, but don't let it touch your self-worth. That you are a valuable person who something shitty just happened to. The shitty thing did not happen to you because there was something wrong with you or you deserved it. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. And to hold on to, that I did not deserve this, that this is just something that happened that I'm now going to have to live with and learn to navigate. This is now part of my history. So how can I make it matter? How can I make it count? How can I turn this into something positive that takes my power back from them? Like, as long as they still have influence over you, the abuse, the assault is still going on. And so finding some way to take that back and find some kind of purpose in it. one of the paths that my life has taken is now I'm a spiritual healing coach and mentor. And this comes up a lot when I'm coaching women who've had experience in sexual assault. And so being able to now speak to that and use my experience to then lift other people up and be able to speak up for these boys, like that has been incredibly healing for me, because it brought around an opportunity to speak up again. Like back then I wasn't heard. I didn't matter back then. And so it was like a second chance. And it was a second chance to make it matter and to protect or at least defend some people who were younger than me and more innocent. And so it was this, and that was like a healing moment that I was able to look back and be like, wow, I totally see why this happened. And it was in the way the universe does. Sometimes you get the biggest gems from the biggest pile of shit. Mm-hmm. And how much I learned from that and the journey of pulling myself out of that. That's really what gave me my power and my magic. And that's now what I can use to help people. And so there is always a pearl in it. And I know that that's probably a really hard truth to hear right now when they're feeling so awful. But as they go forward, I would just tell them, like, keep looking for the pearl. There is one. Don't let this be just a horrible story that you never want to talk about, that you walk down in shame and just carry. Like, don't let that happen. Like, you have to find some way to look back and be like, this happened to me for a reason. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that it fortified me in some way, that it gave me some empathy, that it gave me deeper compassion, it gave me deeper understanding. Maybe they'll go on to be advocates, but something. So that would be my main thing, is try so hard to hold on to the reality that this is just a horrible thing that happened to you, that you are still whole, complete, and perfect. Do not let them take that away from you, and find some way to make it mean something bigger than you.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful too. You're following your own advice in that, and like making it mean something. Like, you're able to now help others. And I think that it can be really hard to think about the idea of utilizing a traumatic experience. But I think that there's so much strength that comes from sort of turning it around. In a way, it's almost like the ultimate screw you to the people that have done wrong, to say, well, now I'm able to do even more, I'm able to now turn around and help people because, you did this really awful thing, but I'm able to sort of absorb that power and turn it into something that's for good. And I think that can be really, really hard for people to do, for sure.
Especially when it's this fresh.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
That's the part where it's like, it's so, like, it's a hard thing to navigate, because while there's this part of like, make it mean something, there's also the part of like, you're probably not going to see that for probably another like decade.
Yeah.
And that's a tough pill to swallow, that it's like, this is going to be a long process of unwinding and unpacking this, and multiple rounds of therapy and talking about it. And this is probably going to pop up in relationships, and this is going to be a trigger that you're going to be dealing with for a long time, and it's going to be really, really rough. But again, if you can at least have that, like that North Star that's pulling you forward, it's like, I'm not just going to accept this. Like, every time I recognize a deeper layer of damage that was done, I'm going to commit to healing that. Yeah. There's never, you just see it and then you're just like, oh shit, I guess I'm just going to accept that. You're just like, oh no. And for me, it came from the will to keep doing that, came from this, like, they will not have power over me. That was really the driving force, that every time I discovered a new layer that linked back to this, it was pardon my language, it was kind of like a big, like, fuck you.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm healing this to spite you. Like, and it kind of almost had to start like that, but it turned into, I'm doing it for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it had to start almost from this rage of like, you just don't get to do that. Like, you don't get to do this to me anymore.
Yeah.
Like, when I think about this, it still fucks me up.
Yeah.
And you don't get to do that to me anymore, you know? And so that was it's, I think, a big thing of mindset. But again, you don't fully understand what you're dealing with for a long time. As I think so many people with any kind of sexual assault or any kind of assault, they just expect people to be okay. It's like, it was a year ago, 2 years ago. And it's like, yeah, I just started.
Yeah.
We're just in the beginning. Like, give people time.
The beautiful thing and the hard thing about healing is you can't rush it. It doesn't happen overnight, and it might be a year or two before you're even ready to start processing it. Actually, I had a teacher for a while that would say, whatever trauma and shit that's happened in your life, you now have incredible fertilizer, which is like, and that is that hard pill to swallow, right? It's that, how dare you say that, like, something can grow from this horrible thing, but also, like, part of taking your power back is allowing something beautiful to grow from this terrible thing. Anyway, I love your perspective. And I have to ask, because kind of the flip side of, like, this is, what advice would you give people that are trying to support their loved ones who've been through an experience like sexual assault? Like, when someone is in that process of healing, how do you actually support them well?
It's a tricky thing, because again, you have to walk this very fine line, because this is an incredibly delicate thing to talk about, and for a lot of people, it's wrapped up in multiple layers of shame too. So you have to tread lightly. And so my first thing would be, like, be patient and don't push. Like, if they don't want to talk about it, don't force them to talk about it. Like, this is not on your timeline. This is on theirs. And so I think the big thing is keep your ego out of it. This isn't about you. And it can be hard to watch someone you love go through that. And there can be an incline to, like, okay, come on, let's move it along. Like,
You want to fix it.
yeah. And it's like, that's almost the worst thing you can do, because they just had their autonomy assaulted so severely that it's like you coming in and telling them again what to do and what they should do. If, like, you're making it worse, you're compounding the trauma, like, stop. Like, they need to be in control of this. And that's part of the healing, is them taking back control. And so I know it's hard to kind of keep your hands off, but they really need to be the one to guide that journey. And only they're going to know the right way. Like, it's going to be their way. And it's especially when you're dealing with sexual assault, any kind of sexual, as soon as you get into any kind of penetration, that it takes on a whole nother level again. Because I was just touched on the outside of my body, but as soon as the physical boundaries of your body are penetrated, that's a whole nother level of assault that we're talking about. And to have felt something that you did not give permission literally enter your body, like, that's a whole nother level of mindfuck that they're going to have to really decide how they want to put those pieces back together. And they're going to need support. So that would be the one part where I would say, like, don't, like, keep your hands off, but also don't leave them alone. And support them in getting help. And, you know, again, let them do it in their own time and their own way, but also know the warning signs, and know if you see them slipping into dark depression and they're, like, giving up, like, then intervene. Like, yes, like, no, like, I'm not going to let you kill yourself or fall into this depression. Like, you know, at that point, like, you got to give help and support, but you also can't force. And so it's a really delicate balance. And that's why I say, like, when this kind of assault happens, it's like, it doesn't just happen to the person. It happens to the whole family, to that whole person's community and their inner circle. And so I think that's also part of the thing they have to understand is, like, don't neglect your own trauma. the parents, like, you're probably going to need some therapy too.
Yeah.
You're going to need to talk to somebody about, like, what was that like to watch your kid go through that? Like, are you talking to someone about that? Are you grieving that? Are you allowing yourself to feel that? Or are you still just trying to be strong for them? And I think a lot of parents need to see that of, it's important for you to get help and support too. Because I know it was really hard on my parents to go through that. So it's a whole family healing situation.
When I think of that teacher too that you mentioned, sometimes it can be as simple as like, here's a safe place to come, opening up space for people.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing too, is don't always try to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes the best thing you can do as a friend, if you're a friend of someone who's doing this, or who's going through this, is just be like, get them maybe out of their house, and just be like, do you want to come over and watch a movie and drink some tea? We're not going to talk about it at all, but why don't you take a shower, put some clothes on and come over. Let's go for a walk and talk to them about something else, or allow them to just sit there in silence and don't talk to them at all, but just give them, like you said, that safe space to be, that's not in their hole. Don't force them out of the hole, but give them an alternative. Invite them into sunshine, invite them into, especially when you're coming up on anniversaries and you can start to see like the depression, start to trigger, and you can see them start to kind of deteriorate. It's like during that time. So that's the thing that I think families can do, is never forget the anniversaries and make sure you're paying special attention to them around that time and just giving them extra support, checking in with them, like, how you doing? And just encourage vulnerability. And I think that's another thing for parents. So it's like, talk openly with your kids too. Like, I know it's easy to slip into that, like, I got to be strong for my kids, but grieve with them. Let them know that you're just as upset as they are, and that even though the school failed them, and that justice hasn't been served, like, remind them that, like, you would lay down your life for them, you would always fight for them, they're never alone. Like, that's some of the best things you can tell somebody. Like, I'm sorry the system failed you, but we're still here. And that's incredibly powerful to feel that kind of support around you during that time when you're questioning so much of, like, your own self-worth and your belonging, and that your safety with people, like being around people who make you feel safe, is really important.
Yeah, thank you so much. For just sharing at all. Everything that you've said has been so, I think, precious. Just to be able to sit and listen to you has been an honor. And I really admire your bravery and your courage and the power and fire that you do hold is amazing. And so for our final question, before we close, we ask this of all of our guests. And I wondered, what does the phrase woman being mean to you?
I sat with this. Was probably, when you guys sent this question, it's probably one that I sat with the most. It's like, what does this mean to me? And to me, it really means no longer living in fear of being. That, women have lived in fear for so long, whether it be fear of not being enough, fear of not being beautiful, fear of not being loved, fear of not being safe, fear of being preyed upon by men, fear of not being treated equally. Like, there's so much fear that women operate under, and you almost don't even realize it. It's so indoctrinated that you don't even realize that you're walking around terrified in a lot of ways.
It becomes like a normal.
Yeah, that we're trained from early, like, walk with keys between your knuckles. You're like, why is that a normal thing? We're teaching girls. So, like, if you have to have a scrappy fight in an alley, here's how you do it. It's like, oh my God, are we really, like, this is part of teaching women? Like, whew, that's heavy when you really think about it. And not feeling safe in our bodies. So I feel like the process of, like, becoming woman again is like shedding that fear and just being like, we got ourselves. Like, as women, we're so much stronger than society has ever taught us. And so learning that we can be our own warriors, we can be our own heroes, and we don't need shit from those other people. Like, I got me. Mm-hmm. And that was a really empowering thing of like when I was sitting and thinking of like, do I really want to come forward? Do I really want to potentially open this door of bringing this all back up? What if the West Valley people started attacking me again? Like I was really sitting with this. And it was such an empowering moment to when I thought with that. And it was just like, there's nothing they can do. Bring it. Mm-hmm. That is like, I've done my work. I've got my people around me. I've got my self-worth intact. Like you've already said everything. Like you've already called me a whore. You've already said everything you can say to me. So mm-hmm. at this point, just pick on someone your own size. Leave these kids alone.
Yeah.
And being able to like say that and mean it, that was a moment for me where I realized like I had this process had shed a massive piece of fear that I've been carrying for a long time, which is the fear of not being heard, the fear of not being listened to, the fear of not being believed. And that moment of deciding to step up and being like, I don't give a shit. I don't care if anyone believes me. What happened to me was valid. What happened to those boys was valid. And I deserve to say my piece. And so that was like a big, like revolutionary moment as a woman to come back and be able to speak to the people who had helped perpetually do this to me and be able to come back 17 years later. Like that was a big moment for me. So I think part of what you're saying, being a woman, is like shedding that fear and really owning our power as women and how effective we can be. I think that's a huge revolutionary moment for me too.
That's amazing. It's always never ceases to be a fun question for me to hear the different things that come, and it's all right and good. And so yeah, love your piece of it. Before we close, do you have any resources you'd like to share with people listening to the podcast?
This might not have been something that a little resource people don't talk about often, but for me, one of the biggest things that shifted this, especially anybody who's dealing with sexual assault, is any kind of movement therapy. So like dancing, boxing, things like that. That when your body is assaulted, there's like a shame that happens and you disconnect from your body and you kind of shut down. And so any kind of movement therapy that brings you back into your body, that kind of, you have to reclaim your body after that. After somebody touches you or assaults you, like you almost have to reclaim your body from that person or that situation. And dance has been a huge part of that for me. So I think anybody who's gone through any kind of sexual or physical assault and they're still struggling with that, carrying that fear in their bodies, it's like, go boxing, go punch it out, go dance it out, like physically reclaim your body and get that energy out of your body, because your body remembers. Like emotion is stored in your cells, and you can do therapy cognitively and you can talk about it, but it's still in your cells, it's still in your muscles. So any kind of physical movement therapy that can help you get that energy literally out of your body is incredibly healing. So I would do that in addition to all your other kinds of therapies to make sure you're moving and getting back in connection with your body.
That's awesome.
Nonlinear movement is one of the practices that has greatly helped me. And so I love that was actually your recommendation, because yeah, movement is, I feel like, key to so many things. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Well, again, Sondra, thank you so much for coming on. We are so grateful and really excited to be a mouthpiece for your story and to help kind of get the word out too. And I hope that for anyone who's listening who has experienced West Valley, who has experienced the town of Cottonwood, who understands what we're talking about here, that you would be inspired to dig a little bit deeper, maybe voice your own concerns and kind of stand in solidarity with the survivors of the assault that has been perpetuated for years.
And if you have any story, as small or large, like anything, like come forward and like even comment on this podcast, like anywhere and everywhere that you see it. If you have a story, I think the more stories that come forward, the more it gets hard for the school to say this was an isolated incident. And the more people that share their stories across the years, the more that they're going to have to shift something. So if you know anything, if you've experienced anything, seen anything, please come forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in situations like this, it seems like mass public pressure is what finally pushes change to happen. There could be one or two incidences, and those can sort of just be brushed away until it's overwhelming, the amount of public outcry. So that's really valuable.
Yeah. Lastly, I just want to invite you guys, if you have not yet, to subscribe to our podcast on whatever podcast platform you prefer. We are on Spotify and Stitcher and Apple Podcasts and YouTube and I don't know, pretty much everywhere.
Amazon, Audible.
You can find us. And we really ask that you would give us a review too. That was greatly increase our reach and also are just amazing to read and super encouraging to us as we continue to invite people to the table to talk about women's issues. So if you really love what we're doing and you want to help more of this happen, we'd love for you to leave us a review. And with all that being said, thank you, ladies, for joining me today. It was lovely to sit with you here. And for everyone listening, we'll talk at you next week.